Thanks for checking out Ageless Wanderer. We know you're going to like the channel, so please subscribe now. Good morning, guys. I thought I'd go ahead and do a little video of doing the maintenance on my boat and my trailer prior to doing about a couple thousand-mile drive, and then following with about a 23 to 2600 mile run in the boat. So we're going to do a complete maintenance on the trailer, give it a good look over. Same thing on the outboard motor and the jack plate, making sure that we've got all that grease. So let's get started. First thing you want to do before you get started servicing the motor, if you use a transom saver or a motor support, like I use the motor support, you want to go ahead and get that off of there so you can get your motor nice and level so that you can fully drain the oil. What I like to do is when I'm draining the oil, I'll raise the motor and lower the motor just to make sure I let all the oil kind of work through the system and get down to the drain. When it comes to selecting oil for your motor, you should probably review the manufacturer's recommendations. For situations like I'm getting ready to do on the inside passage, I could probably use 530 weight, because I'm being cooler temperatures, but I think I will be above 40 degrees a big portion of the time, so I'm probably going to go ahead and run something like a 2540, which is a recommended general use engine oil for this motor. I don't always go with NMMA FCW qualifications. Those are the qualifications for marine applications. I generally am looking for a GL5 or a GL6 automotive oil. Those meet the latest standards for warmer running fuel injected engines, and get that in a synthetic lubricant. I change my oil regularly, and so I'm not as worried about running a marine rated lubricant as having a really good quality automotive lubricant to run in the oil. So I'll generally, it doesn't matter the brand to me as long as it meets the GL5 or GL6 standards, but I generally end up with Mobil 1. Catch it on sale at Walmart or one of the auto parts stores. I also like to give my motor a good look over and make sure I don't see any corrosion or salt buildup or anything, because when you think about it, the motor is breathing the air that is under the engine cowling, and if it's sucking dust and corrosion and salt stuff, all that air is coming right through here, basically unfiltered. So yeah, your dead space under your engine cowl is mainly a sediment filter. So I like to make sure I get that well cleaned. So I'll wipe that down after I change the oil, and I give all my filters a good looking at. Generally my filters stay clean just because I run a pre-filter and water separator, and I've gone ahead and found the Fram equivalent to my oil filters, so I can buy them much cheaper, and since I do change my oil quite a bit. I run an hour meter on my motor that comes off with a spark plug. That allows me to keep up with my oil changes. Typically I change my oil every 30 hours or so, which I know is excessive. The manufacturer says around 100, but it's a pretty cheap thing to do to make sure you're not recirculating any motor little bits of metal and carbon that run through motors. So I think it's just a good way to assure that you're going to have a motor that lasts a long time. On this trip I'm going to be running about 23 to 2600 miles in the boat, so that's about my average speed, 23 to 26 miles per hour. So that should indicate that I'm going to be staying around the 100-hour recommended oil change. So I shouldn't need to change the oil during the inside passage trip, but somewhere along the way, if I see a really inexpensive and convenient opportunity to out haul, I'll go ahead and bring an extra oil filter with me and buy some oil there and change out the oil. When I was up in the Northwest Passage, 1,000 miles into my trip, I was out, had my boat out working on the hull anyway, so I went ahead and did an oil change. I just think it's a good idea. So the other thing we're going to do today is we're going to hit all of the grease zerks on the motor and on our jack plate, kick plate, and just make sure everything is lubricated well. We're also going to change out the lower unit oil, and I think I'm going to use a Quicksilver 80/90 weight lube, just because I got a bunch of that on sale at Walmart one time. So that's what I've been using. But I think any good grade 80/90 weight oil, if you change your lower unit regularly, will do the trick. Yeah, I run the Fram PH 6607, which I found is the replacement filter for the Tohatsu MFS 40, which is a 2022 model Tohatsu. And I've been running these for a while. In fact, I'm going to pick up a few more because I'm starting to get low on them. When I'm changing the lower unit, I like to use a screwdriver head on a 1/4-inch drive wrench. Just makes it easier to break the screws loose. And I like to use a open, shallow pan. That way I can see if there's any metal parts shearing off, whether it be bearings or shift gears or something like that. And if it's coming apart, I want to see it when I drain my oil. When you drain your oil, you want to see it coming out looking like oil. It should be nice and dark. If it's relatively new, it should have some clarity, but you definitely don't want to see a chocolate milkshake or something that looks like a mocha cream coffee, which I really don't know what that means, but I know that mocha means it's kind of lightweight. But yeah, that's what you want to see, some nice oil free of water. At this point, I lowered the engine down just to kind of change all the angles to make sure I get all of the lubricant out, and I'll raise it up and down some while we're changing the oil here or changing the lower unit oil to get every last drop of it out. I like to take my pan of lower unit oil and just kind of swirl it around and look to see if there's any metal parts that are laying on the bottom of my pan. And it looks like we are free of any metal, which is good. It's very common to see some little bits of oil just from your clutch dog and gears shifting, but we're look to be free of any oil. And then I like to put a little on my finger, and then I can get a feel for the clarity of the oil. And you can see the oil's got, still got good clarity, so we didn't heat it up or we didn't get a bunch of water in it, because it's nice and clear and not milky. Okay, we got the lower unit drained and filled, so now we're going to pull this drain here and we're going to drain the crankcase. And we went ahead and did the same thing. We cleaned the bucket and kind of wiped it dry of most of the oil, so if we can see any metal that comes out of this. And we're going to go ahead and start draining the crankcase. Okay, after getting the crankcase oil drained, I went ahead and checked the bottom of the pan by swishing around to see if we had any metal in there, and it was clear of metal. Next, we used my filter gripping pliers and we undid the oil filter, and it's located right here. I like to stuff a bunch of paper towels under it so I don't get oil all over the place. And we're going to replace it with a brand new PH 6607 Fram, extra heavy duty or extra guard. Okay, I added about 2.7 quarts of oil into the oil fill here, and that just hit the top of the dipstick. That's enough to fill the oil filter also, so we're right at the edge of overfill. So we'll start it tomorrow, and make sure that when this oil filter fills up that we're right within the acceptable range of full. But we're just a little bit over without that filled up, so I think we're okay. Next, I went in with the grease gun and I hit all the grease certs on the vents, jack plate, and I also hit the grease certs on the front of the motor and on the turn drive shaft. And I think we got all of the grease certs hit on the motor as well as the jack plate. So I think next, since we've got the motor and jack plate all taken care of, we'll go to the wheel bearings and take a look at that. One of the things I like to do is, in addition to just greasing the wheel, I like to go ahead and jack it up and give it a good spin and see what it sounds like and see what it feels like. Okay, we're getting no sounds here, and there's no looseness in the bearings, so we've probably got good bearings. The only thing I'm concerned about now is, do we have water inside these bearings? I am not a big fan of bearing buddies. What I ordered with this trailer is a special axle that has a hole through the middle of the spindle, and there's a grease cert under this cover. And if I hit this grease cert with grease, it takes grease all the way back to the back of the inside bearing and forces grease through it and out. So it's actually like repacking the bearings. I am not a fan of bearing buddies that you put on here and you just pump pressure into it. I call those rear axle seal remover tools, because what it does is it pressurizes the axle assembly and just pops that back seal out of the axle. You can always look at people that have bearing buddies boats, look across to the other side, and you'll see oil splattered or grease splattered all over the inside of their wheel where they've pushed that oil seal out. And as soon as they lose the oil seal, they're getting water and salt water in there, and they're going to lose their bearings. So what I did is I just pumped and pumped and pumped until I pushed the old grease out, and I just kind of spun the wheel as I was doing it until I started seeing some of the new grease. So, and no water came out. It was free of water. So I think I'm in good shape on this one. I did stick my finger to the backside and felt the rear seal to see if there was any grease on the outside of the rear seal, and it was clean and was in place. So I think we're in really good shape. For all the torture I put this through, this wheel's probably been 12,000 miles, over about 10,000 of that was headed up to the Arctic Ocean, and probably 1,300 of that was over really rough gravel roads. So I'm really happy with the way it held up. And so I just cleaned up the cap, cleaned up the outer seal, and replaced the outer seal, and we'll go check the other wheel now. You might want to ask me, well, if I've got a bearing buddy here, or I've just got a cap on here, what would you do, Robert, if you're running lots of miles, running salt and fresh water? Well, what I would recommend is what I did for years, is once a year I pulled my my wheel off and I pull the bearings out and would either replace them, but generally I was so cost effective, cheap, I would just pull them out, soak them in gasoline, and get all the old grease out, and then I would hand pack them with new grease. The greases we've got nowadays are much better greases than when I was a kid. I think they hold up a lot better, but I'd always either replace my rear seal or at least inspect it really well and make sure it was in good shape. And then I would fill it up to the top and put my cap back on. And that's what I recommend you do if you don't have this cool through the spindle greasing system. Again, avoid bearing buddies because they just have a tendency of pushing the back seal out. If you're really careful and you just let the bearing buddy fill up to the top and then you don't touch them the rest of the year, but I've seen people that just every time they go out they cram more oil into their bearing buddy and it's topped out, the springs sprung all the way at the top, and there's nowhere for the grease to go except to push the back seal out. So yeah, there is a way to use bearing buddies correctly. It's just fill them and then never touch them, and just let it absorb, or as it cools off when it goes in the water, it can pull that spring in and then expand back out. But yeah, don't keep putting oil or grease and grease and grease on a bearing buddy without expecting to blow the back seal. Well, dang it, see that nice creamy grease there in this bearing? This bearing's had water in it, and it's going to be interesting to see as I pump more grease in there if I can get all this white grease out of there. So I've got it jacked up. So I'm not getting any bearing noise. Let's see if I've got loose bearings. No, the bearings seem real tight, so they don't seem to be damaged. Sometimes you can get a little water in there with the lubricant, as long as you've got a lot of grease, and it will keep it lubricated, and if you use it a lot, it stays warm and it doesn't rust. So, but I'm going to try and push all of this water out of there and re-grease it. I've already pumped some of the grease out, but you can see more and more of the milky grease, so eventually we should get to the nice fresh red grease. So eventually, after enough pumping, I was able to get just fresh grease coming out and no water coming out. I actually had to put another tube of grease in my grease gun, so there's probably been 3/4 of a tube of grease run through the bearings, both bearings from the back side, and flushed out the whole hub assembly, and it's full of fresh grease. I cleaned all the outside seal and again double checked the back seal. We're not getting any leaks on the back, and we got the front clean, so I think we're good for another 5,000 to 10,000 miles.